Hello, and welcome to Clams Kino, the show where we find out, is this a clam or is this a rock? I'm Chris Tackington.
And I'm Jacob Yopak. And despite what that introduction, maybe quasi-informative introduction was, this is actually about movies.
That's what he says. I say it's about clams, but either way, thank you for joining us. Our goal for this project, to put it out there, is to watch every single one of the director Sidney Lumet's films. I said Lumet, but it's pronounced Lumet. And
we're all guilty of it. We were constantly mispronouncing it for months, years of my life.
Years of my life until Ethan Hawke showed me the way. And we want to watch all of his movies, and we're going to use them to build up a sort of case of how we personally feel about auteur theory. The structure of this podcast is going to be that every movie is going to get its own episode where we're going to break down that movie, discuss it, and kind of analyze it, discuss what it does well, what it maybe fails at, and we want to slowly build up an idea of Sidney Lumet's oeuvre and what was that guy up to for the almost century he was making movies. But this episode is going to be a introduction to the project, a thesis statement, if you will, and we're going to lay down just our goals for the podcast and give you an idea of what our critical perspective is going into this. And best place to start, Sidney Lumet. Discussions around Lumet in the public consciousness, they often hover around his classics, 12 Angry Men, Network, Serpico, and we were discussing that these movies often are kind of consumed by the text's individuality and by their own sense of self-importance, that they don't really seem to be linked to Sidney Lumet as a filmmaker. They're definitely remembered as great films, but they don't really get talked about as, quote, Lumet films.
Like, I don't know, the words on the street is that, like, okay, Ingmar Bergman, he directed Persona, and the amount of people who have heard of Persona and haven't heard of Ingmar Bergman is probably very small. Same thing with, like, Orson Welles and Citizen Kane. Like, the film and the filmmaker are linked, like Varda, Cleo from 5 to 7. Or maybe, like, we can ratchet it down a little bit and say maybe even somebody like Michael Bay and Transformers. Like, there's a certain intimate link between the film and the filmmaker there that's not present with Lumet.
And yeah, that authorship that those filmmakers have is what Jacob and I feel that Lumet is really lacking. And despite all of his many well-regarded films, Lumet in the cinema world is not really considered an auteur. And we want to know why that is. And to really tackle that, we have to ask the obvious question, and we have to ask it to Jacob. What is auteur theory?
Well, thank you. And first flag on the play is when he said he's been making films for almost a century. Do you mean he's been making films for 51 years?
That's exactly what I mean. He's just cracked the median.
Okay, so he went 51 years. Basically, it's 100. Okay.
I round up hard.
Christopher is the math student, by the way. But okay, so auteur theory. In the 1950s, there's a bunch of French people who were writing this magazine called Cahiers du Cinéma, Cahiers, which just translates to the cinema magazine, basically. And they published a set of negative reviews of now darling Billy Wilder. And, these French people would then grow up to make some pretty good movies of their own, like Rivette, Truffaut, Godard, Raymer. Again, still can't really pronounce French. But in these polemical reviews, they attacked Wilder as a metteur en scène, which translates most explicitly as a putter on the scene. Though it technically means director.
But that they are basically calling Wilder something between a talentless hack and a high school theater director.
So when they were praising Wilder, they were focused on his screenplays, but they were highly critical of his filmmaking. So in between these snubs, they did manage to say that Sunset Boulevard is the 8th best film of the year, which I think was 1950. Which is a position that we can get behind, and I'm speaking for both of us. So very pointedly, they claimed that Wilder was not an auteur, which literally translates to author, and in this context means a filmmaker, which usually is a director, that manages to push back the inherently industrial nature of film production and shape the film with their unique genius. So like Hitchcock authored Vertigo, Ackerman authored Jeannie Dielman, Lee authored Do the Right Thing. And within the theory, the auteur has a unique status as the creator of the film. And for the Cahiers boys, this was not the case for Wilder. Demi just puts things in front of the camera. He made art the same way that the camera does, like his abilities were purely technical. And on the other side of the Atlantic, Andrew Saris, still don't really know. Uh, yes, the Google AI blurb was not very helpful for pronunciation advice.
And what else could we
Andrew
do?
Saris, yes, Andrew Saris, film critic and BFF of all these French people, created a pantheon of greatest directors to ever work in Hollywood. And, it's film 101 stuff. It's a pretty pale sausage fest. List them out here. So Robert Flaherty, John Ford, E.W. Griffith, Howard Hawks, Buster Keaton, Orson Welles, Fritz Lang, Ernst Lubitsch, F.W. Murnau, Max Ophuls, Joseph von Sternberg, Charlie Chaplin, Alfred Hitchcock, and John Renoir, and Christopher.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite?
Well, it's not going to be Max Awful, am I right? No. So this is an interesting point in which to talk about that Jacob is Doctor Movie, and I'm what am
I'm not
I?
Dr. Movie.
Early medical student movie, something like that. So
Well,
I've seen some
by
movies
that
by
logic,
some of these directors. And I
I'm
got
literally in this metaphor. I'm literally the medical student. I don't know what to tell you.
That's actually true. I suppose that's true. I'm someone who watches Scrubs. But I gotta go with it's easy for me to be either Orson Welles or Howard Hawks. And depending on the day, I'm definitely gonna go with Howard Hawks because Bringing Up Baby is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I want to watch it right now. And it's so cute. What about you? What are you thinking?
I think you can't ask that question of me.
Mm.
Um, no, I have such a soft spot for. I mean, Orson Welles. I have a soft spot for him. Fritz Lang. Maybe it's. Hmm, I can't.
Oh,
I
wait,
Howard.
wait. I haven't been given
Yes.
Lubitsch enough credit, have I?
Yeah, I know you really
Oh,
haven't been giving
fuck.
Lubitsch enough credit. Like Lubitsch, to be or not to be, Shop Around the Corner, Ninochka, Floonie
Mm.
Brown, all really, really good. Like all really good films.
Can you say that it's a position of this podcast that to be or not to be is good? Can we say that?
Yeah, that's an official podcast position,
Official
not unlike
stamp.
commenting on Sunset Boulevard. Official podcast position.
Sure.
Yes. So basically, Saris created this very. There's the 10 directors in this pantheon, and he had this very rigorous classification system with very goofy named tiers in the system. And Billy Wilder was put in the tier called less than meets the eye, which that doesn't sound very nice.
Get fucked.
Basically, yeah, he seemed like an early fearless YouTube video creator, just 5 decades too early or something like that. But in a later edition of his book, Saris says, "Oopsies, I want takes backsies," and then he puts Wilder in the pantheon. Like, bravo to him. Apparently, that can change.
I
So,
love
good
we
for
love that
Wilder.
as a as an example of it's like embarrassing to have mislabeled such an artiste. And we can say that because now, in our present day, not when these terms were first brought up or when the tier list was being forged, Billy Wilder is firmly considered canonical. And Jacob and I are very interested in looking back and trying to understand his initial critical reception being so lukewarm. His movies now are to the point that if you're interested in movies before 1980, you've definitely heard of some of them. You have The Apartment, Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity, The 7-Year Itch, Some Like It Hot. And you've probably even seen some of these. If you haven't, well, nobody's perfect. But the distinction that we're interested in is that you could have watched a healthy number of these and not realized that they were all by the same director, Billy Wilder, that they were Billy Wilder pictures. In fact, that's exactly what I did. And that's the rub of auteur theory. It doesn't really inherently matter if you just make good movies. Auteur is a value neutral term in theory. As a label, it only gains value because the opposite sounds pretty bad. If you're not an auteur, if you're not the author, what are you? Are you just a talentless hack? Are you that purely technical director that the Cahooz boys were describing? Saris, in his notes on the auteur theory, says that, quote, an expert production crew could probably cover up for a chimpanzee in the director's chair. How do you tell the genuine director from the quasi-chimpanzee? After a given number of films, a pattern is emerged.
Yeah,
Established.
so established, yes. I don't want to quote, I don't have Saris's estate being angry at us for misattributing him. Um, yeah, like the question is auteur pattern recognition, or is there something more than that? But so to retroactively say Wilder is an auteur belies one of the 2 points. Like it can mean now, with the benefit of hindsight, we are able to recognize a singular artistic style within Wilder's body of work. And this is sort of what we want auteur to mean.
Mm.
It's what we're all telling ourselves it means. Or it could have a second hidden definition, which unfortunately I often think we all fall into the trap of using it in this way, of using the word this way, is that auteur just really means a person who made a lot of movies we like.
I like them.
Wilder's now darling status stress tests the importance of auteur theory in the public consciousness. Many of his films have survived the test of time, and some even receive our 4 thumbs up endorsement. Is he an auteur really? And then the question is, does every director that we like need to get that label? Because we invest so much psychic energy with directors. Like in my time in film school, all the 10 people that were the pantheon, there was the Film 101 people. We watched so much of them where they're considered the great artists.
Yeah.
But is there something else going on?
It's like Saris retroactively labeling Wilder as an auteur. I feel the pull to do that all the time. And in a less academic context, you see people doing that all the time. You have directors like John Carpenter, Sam Peckinpah, Paul Verhoeven, and David Cronenberg. They get talked about in very similar terms as these non-academic spaces try to create their own, vulgar canon as opposed to
Which is your favorite of those 4?
Oh, okay. It's got to be, for me, I think it's pretty easily John Carpenter. I am obsessed with a lot of his movies, actually. Oh, wait. A more important stamp for this podcast. We are very pro In the Mouth of Madness in this house.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I think that's the best horror film ever made.
I'm going to agree with you. That's going to be the hottest take to come out of this conversation. But
you think so?
The blue scene? Oh, it's blue? Oh, no?
I think that I often find the horror. I know we have a long-standing discussion about the horror film.
Oh yeah,
and I sometimes can find it a little bit boring, but
yeah.
I think In the Mouth of Madness is the best horror film in my opinion.
I am the horror fan in the house. I probably could think of one that I would put higher, but I don't feel like it. I love In the Mouth of Madness, but David Cronenberg probably coming up a close second for me. How do you feel between those 4?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think I like David Cronenberg so much because I like how he's a freak in a way that I find very human in a way, and that's a very weak way of describing it. But I just find the contrast. Like I find the ideas that he's working through very rewarding.
I think John Carpenter
I think John Carpenter makes films that are very entertaining, and I love, like, In the Mouth of Madness, Assault on Precinct 13, Big Trouble in Little China, very good. And also, I don't think Paul Verhoeven's made a bad movie. Like, I think I even watched some of his early stuff when he was still working in Europe, and they were really good too. Yeah. Also, RoboCop.
So your whole thing is that you're going to get me to ask you questions and you're not going to answer them.
Okay.
Have you seen Basic Instinct?
I have not seen Basic Instinct.
I gotta say, I'm actually not a huge fan of Basic Instinct. That's the only Verhoeven movie I've seen that I didn't love. But we're also a pro Showgirls podcast. Easily.
That's true. I think David Cronenberg's my answer. But
okay,
sorry for interrupting.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I just wanted some definition. So back to these vulgar auteurs. Jacob and I, there's reasons that we've talked about them so much. We work through their respective works operating under some general assumptions. Assumptions such as, if I'm looking for blood and guts genre film, it's much more likely that I'll be looking for a Verhoeven or a Cronenberg, in quotes, before some random movie I pick up off the streets. Does the fact that we've created those guidelines alone prove auteur theory? The fact that I have relative confidence in these directors could be a coincidence, or it could be something else going on. They could be very good at picking collaborators. They could know how to delegate. They could be the product of a national cinema production company. They could just be lucky. There are several reasons why the words directed by John Carpenter at the end of a film could be the mark of quality beyond just one person's creative influence. all of these introspections problematize the fantasy of the great artist making the great work of art straight from their mind, ex nihilo, divorced from production history, divorced from everything except the erstwhile artist and the blank canvas of celluloid.
I want to pause here because I just realized that we've been talking for 15 minutes and we just a barrage of directors and a barrage of movies, and you could be thinking, wow, like I don't know if I like movies as much as these sickos. And I just think
Perverts.
about why, yeah, like what does this mean beyond a hyper-specific fixation on film? Like, what does that have to say about art in general? And I think that we could sort of have that discussion uh, by thinking about auteur theory. So this is not just some like insider baseball discussion about auteur theory and then a list of directors that nobody cares about.
No one wants that.
Because I think I hear so much that when I say that I'm a film scholar, people don't really know what that means. And and then I say, oh, you know how people like read novels and then they'll write about them about what they mean. And then people know, then they'll nod along, and then I
Hmm.
say, okay, I kind of do that, but with movies.
Mm.
And I think about both because films are like the modern art form. They're not just works of art, they're also commodities, products of financial engineering, but they're also like a product of so many inputs, so many artistic inputs, so many technical inputs, so many financial inputs. And this sort of makes us question about what is art. Because we like to think about art being product of a singular unified consciousness, a singular human experience, that it's a some creative endeavor, some search for meaning, some artistic idea. And it's hard to imagine that, or rather it gets more complicated to think about it when you're talking about it being a product not only of one director, but of many people. Like when we think about Persona, a film that I think if you've heard of it, it's generally considered one of the most artistic, one of the best films ever made. But it was not only made by Bergman, it was also to a certain degree, it was made by a Swedish film production company that I'm not going to try and pronounce. Like, how do we deal with the fact that art is not only made by artists, but is made by something else? And what do we enjoy if it's something more than just the artist?
I think it's a good thing to point out is, watching and interpreting a movie is such a deeply personal thing to us. It is the default setting essentially to assume a singular perspective as to what a piece of art is saying or doing. It is one thing that you are engaging with, so you are thinking of it as one perspective. And it is really fascinating to then add on the layers of uh, you know, fundamentally, it's many, many people's perspectives going into this. It's just that it's one object. I just find that to be a very interesting sort of lens and something that you and I talk about often. It might even be why we're here. But with that sort of quandary of how to sort of understand this art as a product of not just one person, but A.B. Svensk film industry. He was too much of a coward to say it. I'm going to say it. We believe that Lumet, as a filmmaker, is actually uniquely well positioned to interrogate these investments in the figure of the director as auteur, as singular authority. It bears mentioning that Sidney Lumet constantly highlighted the collaborative nature of film in a way that is not an explicit rejection of the auteur label, but nevertheless is an attempt for him to demystify himself as not the sole creative vision of a film. Beyond that, he just made a lot of movies that Jacob and I really like that are quite different from each other. Is there a common artistic vision that's hidden amongst them that so far eluded us? And what would it mean for a filmmaker to have made a lot of films that we like and for them to still not be considered an auteur? If there is no authorial vision guiding the work, what is there left to enjoy? There's performance, there's narrative, editing, aesthetics. All of these are insufficient to capture the complexities of film as a work of art. Is the decision either enjoying an expression of artistic genius or the outputs of an industry that churns out movies as commodities? Is that all that we have? By being exhaustive in Lumet's filmography, we're going to encounter, his highs, his classics, and some of his lesser efforts. And we're going to see if auteurism is essentially inevitable in a long filmmaking career, or whether overcoming the forces of industrial filmmaking is reserved for only a select few. If we determine that he isn't an auteur, why do we still like most of his films? Jacob, would you like to talk a little bit more about how auteurist criticism, works? How are we going to be using this as a tool?
Yeah, so let's talk about the example, and I'm sure everybody's tired of me at this point talking about Louis Buñuel, but I'm gonna do that anyway. So it's a great example. So it's Louis Buñuel, filmmaker, is very famous for his usage of surrealism, from his early work with Dali to his later works in France. Often, Buñuel surrealism is an easy way to place him in an artistic category. So, and what would be the equivalent type of statement to say about Lumet? So we could say, Lumet, he makes films that often are concerned with justice. They're usually set in New York, and they often have Jewish characters. These are all markers of style to some degree. And but do all these features equal an artistic idea? So like are labeling Buñuel's films as surrealist and Lumet's films as realist films focused on justice set in New York with Jewish characters sufficiently descriptive to understanding them?
It is the position of this program that the answer is an emphatic no.
So like yeah, the first is that a style label is not really enough to get thought of in the public consciousness as an auteur. So we can think of action directors, Shane Black and John McTiernan. Both these people have made films I really liked, like the good Predator movie, and some others that I thought were absolute duds, like the bad Predator movie. I would not say that their relative restriction to a genre would make for a persuasive critical take, for example.
And we don't want to be presenting a sort of straw man of just picking two marginal directors making films in a genre that, and we mean this, unfortunately, is not taken intellectually seriously, such as the action movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna plant my flag here that all the people who like films that are easily labeled as artistic and don't watch action movie slop, I'm gonna say you sometimes you like action movies. It's just as bad if it's just as bad for the people who only watch action movies and don't watch people talking movies as it is for people to never watch an action movie. They're
It's
just as bad, for
sometimes
authors.
watching the action movie is just eating your vegetables. You got to get that
Yes, exactly.
well-rounded perspective.
Yeah, actually, maybe I would actually say that the action movie is probably the tofu, but I understand. I
Okay,
understand.
all right.
Yeah, so leaving the straw man, let's go back to Cronenberg. The director is so unequivocally associated with the body horror genre. It's basically a meme at this point. So how are we to deal with the fact that Cronenberg also made, A Dangerous Method, which is a biographical historical drama, or Maps to the Stars, a psychological thriller, History of Violence, Eastern Promises are like gangster movies. How do we square the fact that these films still feel faithful to his artistic vision without anybody turning into a horrible mutant creature? Or in the case of Buñuel, why do his films in his North America era, like El Joven, Los Olvidables, The Criminal Life of Archibaldo de la Cruz, all still feel like a Buñuel film, despite mostly being bereft of the one thing he is most famous for? So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this?
Well, we're gonna really have to untangle a big old bugbear that is where our aesthetics are coming into play and where theme is coming into play.
So yes, it's a big bugbear, which we're gonna like face right now. So there's a big difference between film as a series of images, creating the illusion of motion, which is a slightly antiquated way of thinking about film, but still there's an illusion of motion happening, when compared to film as a multisensory intellectual experience. So films are a series of images, but they're also somehow more than that. They have, for example, sound, and they also construct narrative, and we create elaborate fantasy structures in order to relate to them. So we can think about comparing various moving picture arts. Let's use a very clunky phrase, uh, like narrative cinema, art installations, commercials, and documentaries. They all technically are doing something similar. They all have the motion happening, but they're also very, very different. And we can think about the difference being to some degree narrative. And I'm gonna invite you all to, I'm gonna try to describe a picture with my in this auditory medium. So maybe
Mm,
everybody can close their eyes, but maybe not if you're not if you're driving.
I'm closing my eyes.
Yeah, yeah. So we can imagine the same set of images in different filmic context. So we can imagine a car commercial. We all know what a car commercial looks like. It's driving through the mountains. It's the only car on the road. It's hitting sexy S curves. It's driving through puddles. It's splattering everywhere. It's going in slow mo.
I want
Yeah.
that car. I want to have sex with that car.
Yeah, yeah, I bet you do. And that's the goal, right? Like you're thinking it's this these are the images. You're not wondering who's the driver of the car. You're not wondering where the car is going. Like the images are, to use a word, like it's a spectacle. The images are flat. You're not really being curious about the world that the images are creating. But we can imagine the exact same image that are used in this hypothetical car commercial being used in an action movie where the hero is in the car and the hero is driving through the sexy S curves. And the hero is driving through mud and it becomes a celebration of their driving skills. Are they going to be able to, I don't know, get to the bad guy's lair and defuse the bomb? Suddenly, you are in the image in a way that you were not before. Your desire is in the image in a way that you were not before.
Now I want to have sex with the guy in the car.
Exactly. You know, that's and that is a huge difference.
Oh,
Huge
yeah.
difference. And we can imagine a third context if the comparison between narrative and a commercial is a bit too vulgar, we can imagine a purely technical exercise. And I've done this before in my film classes where you watch the clip and you're purely looking at it from its technical cinematographic perspective, where you say, okay, this shot was probably used with this focal length. This is this type of shot. It's a long shot. It's a certain camera angle. This was a zoom versus this was a rack focus. This is something like, and you're just describing it at that capacity. And also, when you do that, you're not really in the filmmaking world. You're looking at it from the perspective of the image, and it's relatively flat. So, what is gained then? What is gained with the power of narrative? Why are we in the image more when it is a narrative film? And I think a really good example is it's slightly off, slightly different, but there's a good documentary by Chris Marker called Letters from Siberia. Maybe we can link the scene in the show description down below. I don't know if we can do that. But
We'll find
anyways,
out.
it's this. Well, this the same clip, the same set of images are shown three times, and it just shows how different voiceovers change the perception of the same images. It's a clip from a Soviet town, and it has a faux neutral voiceover, a anti-Soviet voiceover, and a pro-Soviet voiceover, and it shows about how in different filmic contexts the your relationship to the same image can change. It's a little bit different because it's a bit more of a political distinction as opposed to a narrative distinction, but I think it still shows about the contextual meaning of the same image.
And so it really boils down to why do we seem so emotionally invested, almost paradoxically, in stories that are fictitious? Why do we love to sit in a dark room and be lied to? The power of fiction is such that films are simultaneously just their images, but there is also something more present. And that something more is going to get translated by us here in the pod as a theme, in the sense that there is an intangible artistic idea or belief that is present in every movie, or at least every artistically successful movie. And Jacob and I, we are not throwing out aesthetics. We would not call a movie successful if it had the same exact effect if you sat down in the room and closed your eyes while you received spoken exposition and description as actually watching the movie. The fact that there are images has to matter. But when it comes to our analysis, we believe that cinematic art is best explored with the question of theme, the intangible artistic idea that the film is exploring that aesthetics is in service of.
Yeah, so we can start talking about the problem of outliers in an auteur's filmography by route of talking about genre. So you take the relatively simple question of what makes a film a Western, a question I'm sure, Christopher, you have had many sleepless nights
All the time.
tossing and turning, pondering over. Yeah, it's
I don't
very
know if I've
difficult.
ever slept ever.
Yeah, because you're so worried about what makes a Western a Western. So we can just say we can sort of ask what makes a film a Western, how it looks, or what artistic questions or tensions it is exploring. So we can think of all sorts of aesthetic stereotypes of the Western genre. We got cowboys,
Got
wide
cowboys.
open vistas,
Mm-hmm.
gunfights, horses, rural towns. And then we can, exactly, and then we can ask ourselves if there could be films that have all or most of these features and end up not being Westerns. So like take for example, the brothers sisters. I constantly forget if it's actually the sisters brothers, but who knows? A river runs through it and Brokeback Mountain. And clearly these films are visually referencing the Western genre. They have some of them have gunfights, some of them don't. They almost all have rural vistas. Uh, some of them have cowboys. But what are these films about? So, brother sisters, pair of hitmen dealing with the fallout of the lives that they have lived. River runs through it. Bunch of boys looking back on the status of nature in their lives and the importance of their father growing up. Brokeback Mountain, the struggle of two men dealing with a desire that a repressive society deems aberrant. These three films have very different set of main ideas, and the use of the aesthetics of the Western are used into very different ends. So think about the wide open vistas, brother sisters, show how the thing that is preventing the brothers from being violent is their own sense of guilt or lack thereof, not an institution of law. A river runs through it, views the wilderness with a sense of childlike naivete and wonder, not necessarily a dichotomy between law and wilderness. While Brokeback Mountain, the nature recedes into the background and instead allows for Twist and Ennis to embrace a desire they have been heretofore repressing.
I do have tragic news, which is in fact it is Sisters Brothers, but
Oh, it's the Sisters Brothers. Oh,
those
brother.
these three Sisters Brothers. These three examples have very different mobilizations of setting, which is an important aspect in a film's aesthetic. So these films have different central questions as well as different relationships to the setting. Are they westerns or are they not? And this is where we enter the very muddy realm of opinion. As earlier said, in this program has a very strong pro-theme position that film is defined by its idea, and genre is defined by theme, not aesthetics. Using the classic definition of the Western genre as a film that explores a, quote, frontier in the sense that it's the boundary between a place of law and a more wild place, suddenly the classification of the earlier films appears ambiguous.
So yeah, I think in this, by that logic, the Sisters Brothers is the most unambiguous Western because the theme is about sense of guilt that was by violence. Uh, a sense of guilt of the violence that the two men were allowed to perform because they're on a frontier. And I think it's a weak film because it gets too personal, as if like the conclusions that the pair of brothers makes is the end all be all of that question. And then in River Runs Through It, the encroaching status of law is sort of viewed as a fait accompli, and also it's very, very, very romantic. It's not really focused much about law; it's more focused about nature. But of course, the two of those things are related. And then I think Brokeback Mountain is perhaps the most successful, especially in the scene where Ennis is imagining Twist's violent fate as being bludgeoned to death by a group of violent assailants. And so, how are we supposed to contextualize the violence of this moment? So, and I love this ambiguity. Is it a law of equality being confronted by the anarchic forces of bigotry, or is it the opposite? Is it the anarchic qualities of desire being repressed by the smothering forces of a violent law? And I find that question fascinating.
Much to consider.
Yeah, so the exploration of these films' status as non-traditional westerns show the critical power, in my opinion, of this type of analysis. Instead of viewing the symbols and signifiers of these films as purely opting in or opting out into the aesthetic world of a western, this type of analysis can view the aesthetics with ambivalence. The gun is not just a gun. Sometimes a pipe's not just a pipe.
Sometimes.
Sometimes a cigar is not just a cigar, but also sometimes it is. The gun can be a tool for violent repression, liberatory violence, masculinity, technological development, all depending on how the images are mobilized. Thematic analysis uses the aesthetics to interrogate why it is that we care so deeply about cinema, as the example with the car commercial that I described. When it comes to audience investment, narrative captures us in a unique way. It allows us to interrogate what political, ethical, sexual, or social entanglements we have with the film.
And what if we take this thematic analysis and we try to apply it to a filmmaker and not a genre? How does Lumet's New York setting change from film to film, and what does that mean? Or to return to Cronenberg's filmography, is there something that his films explore that is present across both the exemplars of his style, his violent and gross movies, and his aesthetic aberrations, the more down-to-earth dramas?
Yeah, and I think this is the really exciting part of this type of analysis because it makes you, I think it forces your hand to think about films seriously as art. It's exploring a deep philosophical question, even the films that you think are very surface level. Because Cronenberg has all these films that have body horror, and if you want to make sense to his non-body horror films, it makes you think, what does the body horror mean? What question is it asking? And always brought to his films that Cronenberg's body horror is about making explicit the relationship between desire and the human body, and about how we often repress a desire. And I think in Cronenberg's films, often there's like a conspiracy, and there's a certain about how it's making the desire of society, making the collective fantasies of society somehow explicit. And you can see this in lots of his films. So in Videodrome, our voyeuristic desire, you know, makes things happen to use slight anodyne language. Or in The Fly, the Doctor Seth Brundle, which I have to say, it's hard to remember film character names. But I'm never going to forget that the doctor in The Fly is named Dr. Brundle because it's the Brundle
The
fly.
Brundle Fly!
It's the Brundle fly, exactly. So the fly, the Dr. Brundle's desire to acquire new knowledge, his desire to acquire new knowledge, causes him to transcend his physical form. And I think this idea is expressed most explicitly with his earlier films, Shivers and Rabid, in which that which disrupts the logical and whole body is transmitted in an explicitly sexual way. And if there is this question about desire in the body in these films, how do we use that in the films that don't involve people turning into freakish monsters? So we have films like Maps of the Stars, which is explicitly about this question. It's about the desire for celebrity. And instead of having the split between monster and human, there's the image of the facade of celebrity and the actual celebrity body that is required to construct those images. And History of Violence is about confrontation between a violent confrontation that occurs in an otherwise peaceful suburban environment, and then suddenly you realize that this otherwise quote unquote normal family man is capable of horrible acts of brutality. Where there's a split between the body that you think is normal, and then the body that is suddenly capable of horrible acts of violence. And I think this is really interesting because this is where you can say that perhaps even his non-body horror films are more horrible, more monstrous, because instead of you can watch The Fly, you can watch Videodrome and say, I'm not going to turn into a goopy monster. Like that's not something I'm worried about. But you could worry about what horrible acts of violence we're capable of, the darkness that we all know is inside of us. And instead of saying, okay, I'm not a fly, I don't have anything to worry about, and suddenly you're worried about what is the monster within me? What is inside of me that I don't understand? And there's that similarity between his body horror and non-body horror films.
So, such this thematic analysis, when we're doing this at such a breakneck pace, breaking down, four or five movies done by David Cronenberg very quickly, it's really easy to see that this might not be meeting each film in its contradictions, its complications, and its ambivalences. Films are very complicated works of art, but these examples serve to show how we want to approach Lumet's body of work. Beyond how we're going to approach auteurism, there are also two general rules that we want to abide by when discussing and analyzing films. And we're going to be calling these the golden rules. And what are the golden rules? Let's find out.
That is the golden rule. So I think rule number one: talk about films in a way you could not talk about books.
A beautiful and simple rule that I break all the time because narrative is easy. In many cases, it's how we experience film, and how, given how it relates to theme, it certainly does have some sort of place of pride in our critical perspective. However, films are not their narratives. You do not get the same experience watching a film as you do reading their script or their Wikipedia page. They are visual, aesthetic objects. Even if your main interest is narrative, you are clearly missing the point if you ignore how that narrative is relayed to you. One of Jacob's professors used to use the metaphor of a sheet of paper, where film form and content are two sides of a single piece of paper. So one of the guiding lights of how we want to approach Lumet is that it cannot just be the narratives of the movies. We are dealing with Lumet the director, Lumet, not Lumet the frequent stage play adapter, or Lumet the writer.
Also, I'm gonna bare my soul slightly
Okay.
as so in high school. I actually think Chris, you liked movies more than I did in high school,
It might be true.
but I think that was definitely true. Maybe you still like movies than I do. I don't know. But
Weird.
anyways, I remember you. Okay, being high schoolers, I think we're gonna high school boys. Pulp Fiction was considered a classic,
Oh my god,
and
best the movie
I
could be.
remember I remember you really liking Pulp Fiction.
All
I
right.
haven't seen it. And then I remember this is so embarrassing. I remember not watching Pulp Fiction. I remember reading the screenplay and then coming to you as if those were comparable things, and you looked like I had like seven heads.
Oh no, I don't
Because
remember this at
you don't
all.
remember that at all, but I remember that. I remember
You
that because I
read the
remember.
screenplay and then told me that's what you did?
Yeah, I
Wow.
did.
Yeah, that is. I would have looked at you weird. That's very strange. Oh, that's so
Yeah, but
cute.
it is cute. Oh, I have to say that I was not listening to rule number one
You
when I
were.
did that.
Listen, we
I
had
didn't
to
know it
find
was
them
rule
out.
number one.
Jacob,
I had
what
to
do you
find
think
them out.
rule
Sorry.
number two is?
I think rule number two is we cannot fail the film. The film can only fail itself.
Another good sounding rule. So as just beautifully outlined, Jacob and I are movie lovers. Jacob, it wasn't awakened him in high school, but don't worry, your pretty little heads. Maybe this man loves movies too much. In the contemporary moment, we find that single cynical film audiences are constantly looking for reasons to not like a movie. And we're movie lovers. We don't love that. These can range from reasonable reasons that we actually do tend to at least understand, where a film is very challenging on either a political or an ethical level. And we have a lot of respect and sympathy for people who express political problems with a film. We do not extend such grace to people saying things such as, oh, the film wasn't immersive, or oh, I was bored, or any sort of hack phrases that express some sort of critical distance between the movie and themselves. As an audience, we bring so much to a movie. We bring how we're feeling that day, our own biases, our projections. And Jacob and I are of the opinion that criticizing art as art is most successful when you're using the tools that the film is giving you to analyze it. And this connects to our discussion on theme. The analysis that we are interested in doing is about exploring the central structure and questions that the film is exploring. An artistically successful film is the one that sufficiently explores it. So much of modern film analysis fails because instead of seeing what the film is doing, we instead criticize it for what it's not. And no film can be everything.
Yeah, I think a good example is Brokeback Mountain. We can go back to Brokeback Mountain. So
Please.
the film, one of the closing moments of the film, so Twist has died. Ennis is sniffing his shirts, and which is a great emotional moment, memory, all that stuff. And we're not watching that scene and going, "Yeah, this is a great emotional moment." But I just kind of wish Ennis were trying to rob a bank, or I wish he was going to outer space to meet some aliens. And okay, that maybe was a bit ridiculous, but we can think of a more plausible example. Like, what I want to know what Alma, his wife, is up to. What's Alma doing? And because Alma's in the story for a reason. Like, Alma as a character functions as an ambivalent representative of the forces of repression. Like, she as a character shows that they're not always easily detestable brutes. Sometimes you have warm feelings for them, sometimes you even love them, but nevertheless they can also represent society's deep hatred for you. But the film is ultimately not about her as a character. Like, there's a film called Making Love, which is the film about a woman negotiating with her husband who has confessed his homosexuality. And perhaps Brokeback Mountain can be criticized for its unequal gender representation and the reduction of the woman characters into representatives of repression or symbols of a more normative desire for heterosexual men. But the film is ultimately about Ennis and his sexuality. Change in focus to include Alma Moore would fundamentally change the movie, and some may say for the better. But in any case, you have left the realm of talking about what the film is doing, and instead criticizing the film against a hypothetical one you created in your own head. The ability to criticize in this way is never ending. You can always think about an idea, representation, or perspective that a film is lacking. They are finite artistic objects. You can always ask for more. No film has perfect representation in perfect politics. Instead of demanding the film be about something else, we try to think, is the idea that the film is expressing explored vigorously? Now, I think that it's very important that again, we're going to plant another flag. When flags are different from the golden rules, but we can have more than two flags. But
Yes.
planting a flag that we're not talking about either separating the art from the artist or trying to invite politically unengaged film viewing. I actually think that what we're doing is a more politically minded spectatorship than otherwise, because it allows for a film to artistically succeed while portraying a political point of view that I or we or I hope everyone would find monstrous. So, take for example High Noon, Western film about a pacifist woman who's marrying a retiring sheriff. And the film, I'm not going to get into the details, but the film's about him following the law dogmatically and her being a dogmatic pacifist. And the husband is all alone, nobody to fight off the criminals. Everybody has abandoned him, and she doesn't abandon him per se, but she says, "I can't help you fight these people." And it's a really interesting. It could have been a very interesting battle between these two ideals, like law versus peace. And the film ends with the wife character played by Grace Kelly, I believe, shooting one of the assailants. And yeah, so the film ends with her betraying her ideals and shooting one of the attackers. And without litigating the correctness of these two positions, the film nevertheless did not allow for the woman character to sacrifice anything for her ideals, and instead was put in the position where she ultimately must compromise. While I welcome other analysis that says this film is a feminist masterpiece because it shows it shows her giving up her beliefs, the way Amy killed the attacker was filmed like a moment of her shrugging off her naivete, as if her belief in nonviolence was feminine ignorance. In the struggle of ideals, the man was seen as more correct, and cynically the inevitability of violence was asserted. While I found the conclusion of High Noon very sexist, it was still faithful to the central thematic question that the film was asking: the relationship between peace and law, how to negotiate your own ideals with another person. In spite of this, I think ultimately I decided the film is an artistic success, but a political disaster. Now, I think I think I'm gonna let's throw the the everybody's favorite host a bone,
Oh,
and let's talk about some films that Chris has seen. And we're gonna talk.
I'm chuffed.
We're gonna talk about One Battle After Another and Eddington.
Please let me talk about One Battle After Another in Eddington. Jacob and I have been essentially fascinated by these two movies in some way or another for a while now. They're both, of the zeitgeist, and they really, the difference in opinion on them is fascinating to me. One Battle After Another is currently in our moment in time right now that you are not sharing, has just finished its kind of like victory lap at the Oscars. It's a critical darling, and it's also a darling of somewhat leftist internet movie talkers because it is tackling a fascistic, police driven America in an interesting way that we do not see from these big blockbuster movies all the time. And Jacob and I are in the corner going, hey, 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 Eddington did do that as well. And that
Maybe even better.
maybe even better. And that brings to a head actually what a lot of people didn't like about Eddington. And Jacob and I find the differences in the reception to the two movies quite aesthetically driven. People will say that Eddington is sort of both sidesing or being politically irresponsible because even though both movies are sort of tackling a fascistic police state, Eddington is making a curious decision to follow a sheriff of the town with a rather empathetic lens and show the BLM protesters, the sort of politically active young people in the town, to be, aesthetically speaking, quite annoying. There's funny parts in the movie where they are taking up too much space and time with their rhetoric. They are constantly in the face of our protagonist, or at least the person we're following in the movie, as being antagonistic. And the idea of being annoying is really, we don't like it. Nobody wants to be annoying. And I think it's very interesting that people are going to that they see that in the movie Eddington and conflate it with sort of saying something politically about BLM. And we find that it's actually doing a much more delicate statement that is in a lot of ways quite important, which is it's rebuking the idea that the people you agree with politically in a film have to be, transcendentally perfect. And you shouldn't associate the aesthetics of being annoying with a movie critiquing the movie that those people are, the movement, that those people are in. It's that conflation of ethics and politics. You want to assume the people with the politics that you have are going to be transcendentally good, or good in the important ways, which means don't be annoying. We care so much about not being annoying.
Yeah, and I think that that's like also it's a politically fecund thought about if you have. I'm of the opinion that if you're too preoccupied with not being annoying, then you've already ceded ground to a politically conservative project. Because uh, to be annoying, to like to ask questions, to problematize assumptions, to challenge the way things currently are, that's annoying. Nobody likes that. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody likes it when things move smoothly. But I think to that assumption, that desire that people have for things to run smoothly, needs to constantly be problematized and challenged. And that's how political change functions. And I think it's a sort of form of naivete to assume that challenging extant political structures can happen without being annoying, without rocking the boat, and all these assumptions that people have. And to put a really fine point on the distinction between theme and aesthetics, we can go to the topic of the political slogan. Eddington is filled with political sloganeering. I think perhaps the most humorous example is when Joaquin Phoenix is like holding a sign that says, "I am like for air and against communism," or something like that.
It's
Yeah,
a
it's pretty
funny
funny.
movie.
It's a funny movie. And because political slogans are easy and they have a real function, which is they're a low risk way of advertising what side you are on in a political issue. But hidden behind the slogans are more significant political positions that are usually either unconscious or at the very least much harder to articulate. Often, when they are articulated, when you try to scratch below the surface of the slogan, that usually turns into a pretty unrigorous, oh, my side is good and the other side is bad. The thought process that we are all guilty of at some point or another. I'm guilty of it. You're probably guilty of it. Chris, I'm assuming, is guilty of it.
Guilty.
However, politics is only politics when it is described in a non prescriptive way, i.e., you're describing a structural position and not a value judgment. The difference between left wing politics and right wing politics is believing that in some ways the human subject is created by the social as opposed to society being created by accumulating individuals. Like that's a structural position. In that statement I made, there is no, well, one of those things is good and one of those things is bad. It's just a structural description. And this is what art can do. Art can articulate the positions and investments that we have by moving beyond sloganeering and moving beyond our aesthetic relationship to politics. It makes us think about how are we invested in our own political positions? How are these political positions communicated? And the problem to do that requires a textured film experience, a film that does not purely rehash political positions that we already agreed with. Because if we're watching films that purely show us things we already agree with, our assumptions are not being challenged.
All of this to say, I want to emphasize a point Jacob made earlier, which is that using these methods of analysis and the rules that we're trying to lay out, we are not inviting anything close to a politically detached viewing of these movies. But let's not forget what we're here for, our big boy, Sidney Lumet. And we hope that this has been kind of a good example of what we're looking to get into as we continue to go and watch all of Sidney Lumet's 44 movies. We're going to be questioning their aesthetics, talking about their themes, determine, are they talking to each other in an important way? And we really want to learn, is Sidney Lumet some sort of underrated, under-the-radar auteur? Or maybe it's just not that bad to have a chimpanzee in the director's seat.
What is your name, Christopher?
Oh, my name's Christopher. And what's your name, Jacob?
My name's Jacob.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And next we will be talking about the movie Night Falls on Manhattan from 1995.
For those following along at home.
Bye-bye.
Bye.